Just before I hit the search, I want to just put a little endpoint on the body-worn camera. The number of times that Jinx Monahan was asked if anybody had been there over 5 or 6 times, and the answer was no, every single time. And if you listen to her voice on there, you're going to also find a certain kind of assertiveness before she comes up to the door, inconsistent with what we saw on the stand as she gave answers to me. These are the little facts that build to be able to make the determinations of the big facts, the big truth. So the search afterwards, I want to be able to go through this. I'm not going to rush through it, but it's a recap here. Senior Investigator Spezio and FI Trooper Colby Gabler, they conduct an extensive search of the 1263 property residence. You heard it was a multi-hour line search on the property for the wadding and the shells of the 2 fired shots by the defendant. Investigator Spezio said he was there about an hour assisting FIU. FIU was there multiple hours. So when Spezio tells you he searched a particular area, and FIU tells you they searched a particular area, there's your difference in areas that they searched. They searched for the home and discovered the 20-gauge shotgun, the shotgun shells, the .22 revolver and ammunition, and the clothes that Kevin Monahan wore when he fired the gun, including the sandals that he was wearing. Now, although the investigators searched all this area, even off to what we see, they went all the way down to the garage they said, that 60,000-foot area. The reality is, we know the area that wadding would have been, from this point to this point. A dozen men in that area searching through that, a dozen men in that area searching from this deck area all the way down to that point. It's not 60,000 square feet. It's a single line. A dozen men walked it. What were they looking for? They were looking for a spent shell. It's the color and size. On April 16th, when they were searching, that would be clearly visible anywhere they searched that day. You want to know what wadding looks like? There's your wadding. On the boxes here, they show the inside diagram of each bullet, showing you the wadding that fits inside each bullet. You have the slug wadding on the left. You have the birdshot wadding on the right. It takes up the entire inside of it. There it is. They're both white in each of these photographs. That's what they're looking for. And if he's shooting out towards that car, it's in a direct line from that deck to that car. That's where they got to walk. And we get to the point with why it's not there, because he knows the direction he fired it in. He knows the direction to walk and find it. Only one spent shell was found, despite that 2 were fired. There's no indication on the spent shell recovered to know when it was fired. We'll get into that. Because there's no ridge detail on the spent shell. Ridge detail meaning fingerprints. There's insufficient DNA to make a comparison, and there's no wadding recovered on the property. On the 20-gauge shotgun, there's no ridge detail found by the trigger area on the shotgun. And I want you to focus on this area when we deal with the tampering charge. There's insufficient DNA left on the trigger area to make a comparison, although there are 2 donors were determined. Which are the facts of this case means Jinx handled at some point. Objection, Judge. What's wrong? No gunshot residue in the barrel, even after the defendant fired it twice. Now, the defendant fired that gun twice. It went to the state police lab, and Victoria O'Connor looked in the barrel and assessed there was no gunshot residue. She then did an operability test, fired it twice with 2 shells. That's in April. Come later in September, and you have the exhibits in evidence, she re-inspects the gun 4 months later, and the residue from her 2 shots are still in there. 4 months later, her operability shot residue is still in the barrel. But from when this was fired that night, there's no gunshot residue in the barrel. You don't need an expert to tell you what and why. That's what I just covered, which was Victoria O'Connor. She determined on the drop test that the gun was not defective. The gun was dropped barrel down onto the floor. The firing pin rests right above that bullet, and as it hits, the firing pin had to have hit that shell on that drop test. It had to. Was the safety on? Was the safety off? She had to redo the test. She did not hem, she did not haw, she did not hedge. As the professional, she had a standard by which she has to measure if it's defective. And that standard required her to do the test over, and it was not defective. Now, when asked if she dropped a new gun off the shelf, if she dropped a brand new gun and dropped it and it went off, would that render it defective? According to her profession, the answer is no. But then ask yourself, in your own determination, is there any gun you would hold and drop at 4 foot? Don't you think it might go off? Who would do that? You would all treat it the same way, as if it would go off. That's how you treat a gun, loaded or unloaded, as if it would go off. Why? Because it can happen. It does not make a gun defective. I think it was somewhere north of 12 times the gun was dropped with and without the safety. And other than that one instance, the gun did not fire. It was in all other respects not a defective gun. And dropping it that way did not make it. Galen Gillis was shot to death on April 15, 2023. Kevin Monahan pulled the trigger of his 20-gauge shotgun twice. It did not go off on its own. And the second shot killed her. The shotgun used to kill her is a fully functioning and operable shotgun that the defendant loaded ammunition into, racked a live round into the chamber, fired at the vehicles, racked another round, and fired a second round, killing Kalen. Now, I want to cover the Monahan's testimony. Interest in the outcome of a case as a motive to lie. The judge is going to give you this instruction. Different things to consider whether or not we have motives to lie. Jury selection, we went over it. Interest in the outcome of a case is a motive to lie. The defendant who testifies is a person who has an interest in the outcome of the case. Jinx Monahan has a motive to lie. The defendant's her husband. Both Kevin and Jinx have already lied on April 15th to the police and 911. And their trial testimony is totally inconsistent with each other and every other witness in this trial. And that goes into how you're going to determine what it is that they said and whether it's credible. So we have to go through this. Remember, the timeline is the standard by which to measure every allegation of fact by Kevin Monahan and Jinx Monahan, and to expose that nothing said by them is consistent with the facts. At no point in this trial are the allegations of fact by Kevin and Jinx consistent with one another. They are completely contradictory. The only point their stories line up is when they're talking to 911 and the police. The timeline is inconsistent with every other piece of evidence. Kevin's timeline on that stand places the teens on his property for approximately 15 minutes. It doesn't work. And right there, I could put this pointer down and we can stop. None of it works in that time frame. None of it. And yet he committed. He committed to tell you that he doesn't go outside of the house for nearly 5 minutes. It takes another couple minutes before he fires his warning shot. It takes another couple minutes before the motorcycle leaves and the cars start to turn around. Then he has to get over to the north side of the deck to turn around to look back, advance towards the car when he supposedly tripped. Actually, the word, you get to read that, he flinched. That's what he said. He flinched. The second shot under this time frame is not fired for nearly 5 minutes after the first. People are calling 911. I just heard shots. Scott Smith, Jill Ladowski, 5 seconds. The kids, 5 seconds. Totally inconsistent. All right, let's point out some more here. Kevin, I see a motorcycle coming flying. He was very aggressive. Appeared to me he had been there before. Scott Smith, the motorcycle drove gingerly up to the house and came back down. Rory, stalled because he was not giving it enough gas in third gear up a steep driveway. Jinx and Kevin, relative to what he tells her. Kevin, he said on the stand, I wake my wife up, tell her there's people in the yard, get dressed. I told my wife to wear dark clothing in case we had to go outside to the woods. She puts her robe on over her clothes for some reason. What did Jinx tell you? Jinx says, excuse me, I apologize. He continues in his testimony. He says to Jinx, this is what he says he said to her. I'll get your .22 revolver. I'll get you some ammunition. I want you to sit on the floor in the corner and stay there until I come back and get you. And don't look at the windows. If you get readbacks, that's what he says. Jinx, she testified, Kevin woke me up. He said there's a motorcycle revving in the driveway and there's cars in the driveway. He said stay away from the windows. He didn't tell me to hide in the closet. He told me to stay away from the windows. I got out of bed and went and put my robe on and stayed in the closet. They're inconsistent with each other. He's painting this picture as if he's walked her in there, sat her on the ground. Her testimony is he just said stay away from the windows. I chose to go in the closet, she said. Looking for the phone. Kevin, I go through the living room and I'm checking all our furniture for one of our phones, one of our cell phones. He acknowledged that he even looked on the kitchen table for that. Mr. Frost asked, so they're down on the main floor? Kevin, hopefully, yeah. I leave mine in the shop. I leave it in my truck. I don't carry the thing with me that much. Jinx, when she was asked where she keeps her cell phone, downstairs on the kitchen table. Jinx, when she was asked where Kevin keeps his cell phone, on the first floor as well. Totally inconsistent with each other. There's a different picture being painted by Kevin Monahan on the stand, and it's not even lining up with his wife. What Jinx was doing when Kevin came back upstairs. Kevin, when I came back up, she was kind of running around in circles, not really doing anything, just panicking. But just pause for a second. Visualize that. Running around in circles in the closet, out on that floor where there's no rail on the landing. You see the picture being painted, the story being told. She's running around in circles. I mean, you got to visualize that to see if there's any credibility to it. Just totally panicked. Later in his testimony, he said, I went into the closet. I got Jinx. I held her. I picked her up. I took her gun away from her. I held her and picked her up. Well, that is contradictory to itself. One part of his testimony than another. They don't line up, and they can't. What did Jinx say? When she was asked what she did when Kevin came back in, she said, I started to come out of the closet. He came to the top of the stairs as I was at the top of the stairs. I mean, these are little things, but they've got to build. You got to assess the credibility as we go through this. Why he was felt under siege. I'm not getting any kind of indication from anybody what their intent is, you know. We've had people come up before, and even way later at night than that, and they come up really slow. They turn in, they roll down their windows, they wave, or, you know, they toot their horn real quick or holler out, you know, sorry, we're lost, you know, and I'll go out and talk with them and see what's up. When he said that, he said it in a very calm voice, in the I'm really your friendly neighbor kind of guy. That's the voice he used of what he would do if people asked for directions, which would lead you to assume that if you're lost and you don't ask for directions, he's going to shoot at you. Objection, Judge.
What's the basis? Sorry, amended. It's denigrating the defense. It's outside the court's Molyneux ruling. Objection. I move for mistrial. Attorney Morris.
I don't think there's any relation to any of those objections to what I've said.
I agree, so, we'll go with objection.
Even though this night, based on speed only, he went out believing they were about to invade his house by the way the motorcycle came up, he also believed the motorcycle was a scout, and the motorcycle would leave for more reinforcements. Kevin Monahan, in his testimony, Mr. Frost blamed Chief Kalin's death onto the teens for not acting lost. The warning shot. Got the warning shot in quotes. There wasn't a warning shot. He says he held his gun to show the motorcyclist that he has one, but he doesn't get a reaction. Then he turns his back to the vehicles while on the near opposite side of the deck and fires a warning shot. He said, I turned my back to them actually before I even shot the warning shot because I didn't want to be escalated. I didn't want them to think that I was being more aggressive. He went on to say, the warning shot to me is almost like starting a dialogue, I guess. Does that comport with your common sense and reality when you assess the credibility of Mr. Monahan? That he's starting a dialogue by firing a warning shot? That's not what he was doing. The motorcyclist drove away after continuing his conversation like he was out for a drive. The Jeep and the Explorer move up and then back up to the porch and stopped. Kevin says he's re-racked another round into the chamber and has positioned himself on the north side of the house looking at the cars. The Jeep begins down the driveway, but the Explorer goes across the driveway into the lawn and starts and stops 3 times. That's on his direct testimony. So the Jeep goes, then according to him, sometime later, the Explorer starts, gets across the driveway, starts, stops, stops. And that's when he walks out along his rail with the shotgun. Now, he says he holds the gun with his right hand at the foregrip, his left hand over the safety. The barrel is on the outside of the rail and he flinches. That's his word, flinches because of the nail. Mr. Frost asks him, let me back up before we go there. You saw as we did this. Here's a rail. He had to say that his left arm was crooked up and that his right hand was down below it so as to point it to the ground. Now, given his height and the size of the rail, it doesn't leave much room for space. It's kind of a tight squeeze. Now, this is all whether or not you believe him. And that's how he walks out. And he walks out like that all the way along. That doesn't make any sense. Mr. Frost asked him, how do you know you didn't pull the trigger? And this was the response. Because several years ago, decades ago, I broke my wrist really badly. And I can't manipulate my hand that well. So when I'm handling the gun, I always grip the stock with all my fingers and my thumb. And that way I don't have to worry that I'm going to put my hand or finger on the trigger accidentally. You got to compare this to what he does for a living, which is why I went after these 2 things. He's a contractor. He said he worked all day. He does framing, sheetrocking, electrical, has air compression tools, hammers, levels. He uses that every single day. Not only is he left-handed, he said his dominant hand is his left hand. That means any of those tools are used in his left hand. You manipulate a nail gun, you use a hammer. Then I want you to consider that he's a competitive motocross racer. All right? 2018, in the 60s plus, just a couple years ago, not decades ago, he's driving 200 to 300 pound motocross bike, 250 cc's, for 2 hours with the hands on the handlebar, covering distances of 60 miles in rain and snow, terrain going up and down. And he wants you to believe that he knows he didn't pull a trigger because he broke his wrist decades ago. They don't add up in any way. This is the deck picture that I showed during the cross-examination. This is People's 37, photo 201. And this is far off, but I want us to see something here. First post, second post, third post, and the end, fourth post. He said he was at the third post. So let's go to the third post. This is going to be the third post out here. Okay. All right. There are no nails that are sticking up at the third post. Give me just a moment. Okay. This is that third post right there. We can zoom in on it. You're going to see the joist under those boards, and I know it's blurry, but you have this in evidence. When you go all these boards out, there are no nails sticking out on any of these boards, none. When you come back to this joist, there are no nails sticking out on any of these. Oh, it's not zooming in, excuse me. Well, we're going to move on. There are no nails that are sticking out. I want to show you something as well. There's two of these in there. People's Exhibit 33. A stumble that causes him to fire a shotgun. And I can show you the other one too. There's no marks in these sandals. You stub it on a penny nail 3/4 of an inch outside of the deck. Where's the mark? There's none. Both of them are exactly that way. Kevin Monahan claimed to call 911 to report the teens at his property in his direct examination. Mr. Frost, what did you do? Kevin, I called 911. Mr. Frost, and? Kevin, I asked him if they were next door and she said she's not sure. And I said, well, can you see if they're at the right address? Because we have had like a potential incident at our house. Are they? What's the address that they're responding to? I think they're at the wrong place. That's totally inconsistent with the recorded 911 calls. It doesn't exist. The other thing that we have here is he told you he could tell that the police were at the Matthews residence. That's the Matthews residence in the back. He said he could see the officers there with assault rifles walking around. That's how we knew that it wasn't more marauding raiders coming to rob the next guy. Again, totally inconsistent. Mr. Frost, are you a good shot, Kevin? Kevin, no, I don't really practice or anything. Who's got the upstairs in his house? Jinx has the upstairs. Who has the downstairs? Kevin said he has the downstairs. Downstairs was his. Right. She got the upstairs, I got the basement. When you look through the photographs that are admitted to you, this is on People's Exhibit 37, photograph 414. All sorts of motocross pictures surrounding the windows, the desks, the dressers. Right there across the across the way from a desk in his basement. There's a target. He was Exhibit 37, photo 414. That looks like practice. Not only that, if you can look towards the bottom left, there's several pages that are pinned up there. Why did Kevin Monahan fire a second shot? Because he missed the first time. Why didn't Kevin fire the third shot? Because he hit the second time. There's no need. Why didn't Kevin Monahan tell Jinx Monahan that he fired a shotgun at the invaders? Wasn't that curious to you? This traumatic experience, she's running around in circles, panicked, the pool of tears on the floor. She couldn't even load her gun correctly. He has to pick her up, and there's no conversation about shooting at people. None. I'll tell you why. Max saw another figure in the window behind Kevin's right shoulder. He saw Jinx in the downstairs window, perhaps the door.
Objection. He didn't say that.
They can get a read back. It's my recollection of the events of what he said.
I'll overrule the objection.
She saw the whole thing. There was nothing to discuss about what had happened. She already knew. Wasn't on what happened. Focus is on what to do next. The charges. Now we're going to start applying the charges to the facts, or the facts to the charges. Murder in the second degree, reckless endangerment in the first degree, and tampering with physical evidence. Now, if I differ on anything in the law that the judge has, you have to go by what the judge says. Tampering with physical evidence. That on or about April 15th, 2023, in the county of Washington, the defendant, Kevin Monahan, suppressed physical evidence by any act of concealment, alteration, or destruction. That the defendant did so believing that such physical evidence was about to be produced or used in an official proceeding or a prospective official proceeding, and that the defendant did so intending to prevent such production or use. Whew. You're going to have an opportunity to have the judge read the instructions, but I want to give you the roadmap of how to apply facts to these elements. So let's start with official proceeding and prevent production and use. The defendant knew that an official proceeding or a prospective official proceeding would begin because he fired 2 shots at vehicles in his driveway. When he called 911, he asked, "Do you have a call to hear?" And that's because he knew that his shots would result in the police arriving. By asking this, it was an attempt to gain information about the prospective official proceeding, prevent production and use. He immediately distanced himself from the shots by diverting attention to would-be hunters in the woods. He chose hunters because he already knew the sounds they were investigating. He suppressed physical evidence by an act of concealment, alteration, or destruction. This is the third element. This needs to be considered in the context of motive, opportunity, and means. Motive. He does not want the instrument of his crime, shotgun, shells, wadding, to be taken as evidence and used against him. He has to make it appear as though they haven't fired recently. He does not need to completely sanitize any of it, just enough that it can't be determined to have been fired recently. It's a big difference. It's his gun, his DNA is going to be on it, his oils are going to be on it. But to distance himself from the trigger having been fired, to distance himself that 2 shots were fired, and there's only 1 shell. That's the distance he needs. Opportunity. Between 9:50 and 10:22, Tara Smith observed small lights moving around the dark residence on the top of the hill. The defendant even admitted to using the flashlights in the dark. The defendant knew which direction he fired the gun and where to look. The defendant even said he tried to see if the vehicle was damaged. In fact, he said he thought it hit the ground. So he had a location to go to. He had the opportunity under cover of darkness and the use of flashlight to inspect his property and recover the wadding and the shell. After 10:22, when the police arrived, he came in and out of the house nearly 10 times and would stand in the location where he shot from. He was observed by Officer Nussbaum to go in the basement and upstairs to the home while they were down at the garage area. The clothing he was wearing during the shooting was found in the basement near the washing machine, which means he changed. The defendant was not taken into custody until 1:30, nearly 3 hours after the police arrived. So these two time frames have opportunity. That means you need to take a closer look at the Monahan residents to understand something about them. They are neat and orderly people. There is no mess in their home. Everything has a place that is consistent with purpose and use. I'll show you some photographs here and have you take a look. There are people who are neat and orderly. There's nothing wrong with that. This is the bathroom, photo 265. The living room, 297. Jinx's closets. Notice the organization of even the closets. Color coded, very neat, very organized. Look at the kitchen, the dining area, all neat, all organized. Everything is in the right place. Center island, equals 37, photo 321 and 341. Look at the cabinet. Everything is on the proper shelf. It's all grouped together, nice and organized. Photos 544 and 569. Pots are well organized, the pans, cleaning supplies under the sink. No surprise yet. But it's not the things that have a place that's concerning. It's the things that are out of place. The next photograph, there's two things out of place in the kitchen cabinet. Disinfectant wipes and a box of ammunition. The box of ammunition, he said he took from Jinx's nightstand. He said he took the gun back from Jinx and that, this is very curious, he was very aware of how many bullets were in the revolver. 5, he said. 5 in the revolver. He's also very aware of how many bullets were found in this box of shotgun shells. 6. So now we have a great focus by Mr. Monahan on these details. Why? He couldn't remember under a circumstance that he described of being invaded whether he shut the door when he came back in and deadbolted it. Now, if he was believing they could come back and he doesn't remember that detail, why would he remember 5 shells were in the revolver and 6 are in the box? Because it distances him from that gun being loaded all the way. It distances him from all of this. And in the rush, the two things out of place are this sanitizing wipes and that shell. There's your box of 22s and the sanitizing wipes. The only other thing that seemed out of place when you go through all of these photographs, and there's thousands of them, you can look at them all, is the shotgun shells. They're mixed in that box. Everything else on that desk was in the right place, but not the shells. And at the bottom of that box, there's 6 .22 shells from that revolver. He took the 22, he handled all the ammunition, and he handled his shotgun at the same exact time, wiping the barrel just enough so that it didn't appear fired, wiping the trigger guard just enough so there wasn't fingerprints, hiding the shell. Here's the nightstand where the 22 was located when the police came in. Jinx told you that she needed to go downstairs to get her glasses. There they are right there on the nightstand. And next to them, according to Kevin Monahan, would have been her box of ammunition that night, and they're not there. They're not placed back there, but his got placed back. His means is just enough to do what he did and distance himself from that gun being determined to have just fired twice. The defendant is guilty of tampering with physical evidence by altering, concealing, or destroying physical evidence relating to the firing of his 20-gauge shotgun twice by 1, altering, concealing, or destroying.
Jack, can we approach, please?
Sure.
So this will be a quick break. We're just gonna make the record something. I'll be back.
All right, the jury.